Hello vinyl community, this is Tommy in North Carolina, and I wanted to make a video that hopefully will be kind of quick, but it's going to pose more of a question than it is anything. I am going to showcase a couple of albums in this video, but I wanted to ask a specific question, and you guys can make a response video, or perhaps even just comment down below and tell me what you think, or maybe some thoughts on this. But it kind of stems a little bit from James Griffith's video. Hi, James. Hope all is well. Where he talked about Captain Beefheart. And Captain Beefheart is one of those artists that is challenging to a lot of listeners. Maybe a little bit misunderstood. There's a legend around Beefheart that sort of presents itself that this is an artist that's not going to be someone that you're just going to jump right into and appreciate. Tom Waits definitely falls into that category. It took me a long time to appreciate Tom Waits, and boy, when I did, and I really got into Tom Waits, I think Tom Waits is one of the great artists. But this is going to veer a little bit away from that, because I'm not going to just ask the question about challenging artists or artists that continue to challenge their listeners. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of records and give some examples before I ask the question. The first album I'm going to talk about is Todd Rundgren's A Wizard, A True Star. Now, this is the follow-up to Something Anything, which is very highly regarded amongst music fans. People really love that album, and rightfully so. It's a double record set of just nice, great pop rock songs, great arrangements, great singing, great writing, all around. Just a A+ album. But A Wizard, A True Star is the next album that Todd did, and this is really where Todd veers hard to the left. Now, I don't know if he just felt, as an artist, that he just felt like he wasn't ready or prepared to follow up Something Anything. I'm not sure about the commercial successes of those records, so I don't know that Todd was ever just a big commercial artist. I know he had a few hits, but this album definitely just sort of takes the wind out of everything that Todd had been doing up to that point. If you thought he was like a melodic songster or just a pop rock guy, this album messes with you a little bit, and it's a challenging album, and this album has its detractors as well as its fans. I happen to like this album a lot, and just to be honest, all the albums I'm going to talk about in this video, I actually do enjoy. And some of you probably are going to unsubscribe from me when I tell you about these albums. But I just wanted to start off with this one. I mean, it's a challenging album, challenging music, and it definitely, if you think, and Todd Rundgren's kind of been one of those artists anyway throughout his career, even up till today. Todd is one of those guys that you can't pigeonhole him into any one thing. He's all over the place, and he definitely loves to challenge himself as an artist, and he challenges his fans and his listeners with mixed results. I don't think everything that Todd has done is fantastic or great, but at the same time, I do applaud his sort of willingness to go out on an edge, even if I don't like the results all the time. Now, the next album is an album that I've talked about before, and I'm only going to talk briefly about it here. This is the Beach Boys' Love You. And the famous story I have about this album is that I was playing it. I was working in a record store, and I was playing it on the sound system late one night. It was just me, and the manager was in the back counting down some tills. And he walks out, and I'm playing Love You, and he just kind of looks around, and he goes, "What is this crap?" And it's kind of funny, because that kind of sums up a lot if you've never heard this album. It's largely a Brian Wilson solo album, pretty much, with the help of the Beach Boys. Brian pretty much had total control at this point. This is in the late 70s, after the big Brian is Back campaign with 15 Big Ones. Well, then this odd little weird record came out where he's singing about Johnny Carson and the solar system. Now, fans of Brian Wilson, and you guys know who you are, that have heard this album, you're gonna talk about how much you love it, and you're gonna defend it just like I am. I think Peter Buck famously said in the liner notes to the reissue that he likes "Love You" better than he likes Pet Sounds. Now, that's a bit of a stretch. I'm not willing to give Peter Buck that one. It's not better than Pet Sounds, but it is definitely all this sort of eccentric weirdness, adult child sort of things that Brian Wilson was kind of known for. So it's a challenging album, even for fans of the Beach Boys. If you've never heard it, it's one of those. Now, the next one is Bob Dylan's Self-Portrait, and I've talked about that one here too. I love Self-Portrait. But this album was sort of the first, considered to be the first dud in Bob Dylan's career. I mean, he went through the 60s riding this wave of just the spokesman for a generation, all that stuff. Well, the first song on this album is All the Tired Horses, and I think that's a bit of a play because the line is... Papa's not going to get any writing done, which you could use that as a double, writing or riding or writing as Bob Dylan. And I think this is the first sort of crack in the chink, or a chink in the armor for Bob Dylan's career. And at the time, a lot of people were just perplexed by this. There's covers of songs like The Boxer. He does a strange version of that on there. There's a live recording from the Isle of Wight of Like a Rolling Stone. He does just this mix of things. And so Bob, this was probably one of the first major releases Bob did where people were scratching their heads and saying, what is he doing? Now, it's interesting, like a lot of things with Bob Dylan, if fans of Bob know this, as you go through his career and you go through the ups and downs, a lot of Bob Dylan's work tends to, in retrospect, be taken, people take another look at it, and it's given more acclaim. And his gospel period, which I'll focus on in a future video as I'm doing that separate Dylan backwards thing, those records in particular, when they were released, I think people were angry and just, what is Bob doing? And there's a lot of that about Bob Dylan throughout his career, from the time he went electric at Newport all the way through to the recent Standards run. What is he doing? Why is he doing that? That's just sort of being Bob, I guess. But most of those records, when they came out, that were sort of like, you know, written off critically, have been reevaluated, and people appreciate those albums. Now, finally, the last one I want to talk about, this is one that's come up in a few discussions in the Facebook group, as well as through some videos, is Paul McCartney's Press to Play. Now, this album came out in '87. I think 10cc's Eric Stewart was a collaborator with Paul on this album. And this is usually regarded as one of Paul McCartney's worst albums. McCartney fans usually will put it in the lower tier of his releases. It's a pretty much hated album by all accounts. I don't know of many people that actually enjoy this album or like it. Now, I totally understand why. And so before you guys come and lynch me about it and, you know, and say that I'm a complete idiot, which some of you probably think that way anyway, but I want to say that when I play this album, and yes, it is dated, it is cringeworthy, there is a lot of silly moments on this album, and certainly if you kind of go through McCartney in the 80s, there was this sort of run of albums. But I will say this, I listened to this album more than I listened to, certainly Back to the Egg, which I know is a popular McCartney album, but I mean, it's okay to me. London Town, Pipes of Peace. I actually find this album far more listenable and enjoyable. And so having said that, this is an album I can put on. It's not really challenging to me as a listener, and like I said, I don't think the songs are brilliant, but and the big 80s production sort of ruins a lot of the songs on this album, which that was another discussion a while back, 80s production. But song for song, I mean, Only Love Remains is a ballad, is nice. The opening track, Stranglehold, and James also mentioned Good Times Coming, Feel the Sun, as sort of a maybe an underrated late McCartney gem. But you know, I understand the hatred for Press to Play, and so don't get me wrong, I'm not like putting it up there with Band on the Run or Ram or any of those sort of classic McCartney records, but I don't hate the record. Now, I can list some records that I absolutely hate for one reason or another, and I just can't stand listening to them. But Press to Play is not one of those. Even the title track, Press or whatever, it's a silly song, and I mean, no, it's not even close to McCartney's best work. It's probably not even close to some of his worst work. But I guess it's charming in its badness, perhaps. But I guess this comes to the ultimate question that I want to ask that maybe you guys can elaborate on and discuss and so on and so forth. But I want to, my view on these sorts of things, Captain Beefheart, Frank Zappa, who I'm a big fan of, and these sort of bad McCartney records. Now, I know some of you are probably going to say, yes, it's just bad, and that's okay. But I think my view on a lot of music, and I sort of champion a lot of underrated albums or albums I don't feel like get their just due. I talked about that in a previous video a while back. But albums like Who by Numbers, which I think is a highly underrated album, and you know, they're albums that sort of live in the shadows of the great albums or the brilliant albums by particular artists. I mean, obviously the Who did much better work than Who by Numbers, but as an album or as a collection of songs, I like Who by Numbers, and I think that the songs are really fantastic and well conceived and executed. And so it's a shame that it sort of, you know, lives in that shadow of The Who and albums like Who's Next and Tommy and even Quadrophenia. But I guess, like I said, as a listener, as a fan, as someone that appreciates music, I think it is far better to get art than to not get it. Now, I'm not talking about taste. I mean, you like what you like, you don't like what you don't like. Those things happen. I mean, there is a lot of artists that have gone around me over the years, and I've gone back to and appreciated now. I saw a thread recently on Facebook concerning Van Morrison, and someone was talking about, and I know that Jeff Party is a big fan of Van Morrison. I am too. But somebody was commenting on Van Morrison about how they turned 30 before they really appreciated Van Morrison. It wasn't like that for me, for Van, but I get it. I mean, that's another discussion too. Artists that we appreciate as adults or artists that you kind of had to be older to appreciate. But more specifically to this discussion, I want to ask, you know, what is art and how should it be judged? I mean, in reference to Dylan, I talked about how, you know, retrospectively, a lot of his art that was, or music that he's released has sort of come around full circle, and those albums that were pretty panned when they came out have now been reevaluated and lifted up and said, you know what, it's not as bad as we initially said it was. And I'm not even just talking about reviews, because I get that. I mean, you know, Rolling Stone famously dismissed a lot of brilliant music through the years, music like Led Zeppelin, which is now revered amongst fans and critics. You know, I had an old Rolling Stone album guide from the late 70s, and it seemed to be this sort of time period when it was kind of cool to bash the Beatles. And so a lot of the reviews in there, like on Sgt. Pepper, was along the lines of, you know, this was a pompous record and it influenced all this junk and blah blah blah. So it's sort of the sort of riding opinion at the time that, oh, the Beatles weren't all that. Well, now that's come back around in the 1991 or 90 edition of the album guide. It gives the album 5 stars, and it's a landmark album and it's great. And so, you know, the second part of this question, or the second thing I would ask, really concerns the sort of thought that I think that art has to age to be fully appreciated. In the case of Dylan, Self-Portrait, when it came out, it was confusing and perplexing. now that years have gone by and people can enjoy it for what it is, people have said, you know, it's not that bad. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to go back to again, Press to Play is a bad album. It's always going to be a bad album. But I guess that comes back all the way to what I was initially saying and what I'm saying again. I just am willing to give things the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to give things a second chance or third chance or 20th chance because, you know, especially if it's an artist I love. Now, don't get me wrong. I know time is short when you've got so much music to listen to. It's hard to go back and say, well, you know what? I could spend the next hour listening to a really good album, or I'm going to spend it listening to Press to Play by Paul McCartney. My thing about Press to Play, it's just fun. It's okay. You know, like I said, it's not going to blow my mind like Band on the Run is or anything like that. It's just an album of songs. And I'm not trying to sort of reinvent the wheel here. But I do want to ask the question to you guys, do you think it's better to appreciate art, or do you just not have time for it? Is your time too precious to waste it just trying to understand something? But I'd love to hear from you guys, so comment down below or make a response video. Those are always fun, and just let me know what you think. And, you know, if you know somebody that has asked this question or is dealing with it, share the video with them, people that may not know my channel or watch my videos. And so, you know, I always welcome new people and new viewers. So that's the question. Is it better to appreciate art, or to just not have time to waste on things that you think are not worth the time? So let me know what you think. Daily Records, there is a link in the box up above my header on my page. That's my other channel. I do a different record every day. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It's TommyBurton75. Or shoot me a friend request on Facebook. I usually show what I'm spending on those social networks, so it's always fun to show those and to share them with everyone. But in the meantime, thanks for watching so much. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time.